The dust swirled around Ruby Mae O'Hara's worn leather boots as she stepped off the stagecoach in Wind Hollow, her weathered canvas valise clutched in one hand and her heart heavy with memories she'd rather forget. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rutted main street, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. She'd traveled 3 days from Galveston, each mile taking her further from a life that had crumbled beneath the weight of false accusations and closer to what she didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't stay where everyone looked at her with suspicion in their eyes. Wind Hollow wasn't much to look at, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the vast Texas plains like sheep seeking shelter from wolves. The largest structure bore a crudely painted sign reading The Broken Wheel Saloon, its bat-wing doors swaying gently in the evening breeze. Ruby smoothed her dark traveling dress, the fabric dusty from the journey, and tucked a strand of auburn hair back under her bonnet. She'd worn her most modest attire, hoping to make a respectable impression, though the mirror at the last way station had shown her what 3 days of travel did to even the most careful appearance. The saloon beckoned not with promise of whiskey or entertainment, but with the possibility of work. She'd seen the help wanted notice posted at the stage depot in the last town. It wasn't ideal. She was a trained nurse, had spent 5 years tending to the sick and injured in Galveston's busiest hospital, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The moment she pushed through those doors, the lively chatter inside dimmed to whispers. Ruby kept her chin high, though she felt the weight of every stare. Smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the scent of spilled beer and unwashed bodies. Men lined the bar and filled the tables, some playing cards, others simply drinking away whatever demons plagued them. A few women in bright dresses and painted faces moved between the tables, their laughter too loud and their smiles too wide. Behind the bar stood a mountain of a man with graying whiskers and arms like tree trunks. This had to be Bill Murphy, the proprietor mentioned in the advertisement. Ruby approached the bar, her boots clicking against the wooden floor in a rhythm that seemed to echo her rapid heartbeat. "Mr. Murphy?" she inquired, her voice steady despite her nerves. He looked her up and down with the calculating gaze of a man who'd seen too much of life's darker side. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "Miss, I'm here about the position. The help wanted notice." A snort came from somewhere to her left. "Another dove come to roost," someone muttered, followed by coarse laughter. Ruby's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes on Murphy. "I'm looking for honest work. Sir, I can clean, cook, keep books. I've had education and—" "Education?" Murphy's eyebrows rose. "What's an educated woman doing looking for work in a place like this?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Ruby had practiced her answer during the long coach ride, but now the words felt like stones in her throat. "Circumstances change. Mr. Murphy, I'm willing to work hard for fair wages." "The job's for a saloon girl," Murphy said bluntly. "Serving drinks, keeping the customers happy. You don't look the type." "I can serve drinks as well as anyone." "It ain't just about serving drinks. Miss, the girls here, he gestured vaguely at the painted women. "They provide companionship. You understand?" Ruby's spine stiffened. "I understand perfectly. I'm looking for employment, not that kind of arrangement." Murphy shook his head. "Then I can't help you. Try the boarding house down the street. Mrs. Watson might need kitchen help." Dismissal rang clear in his tone. Ruby nodded, maintaining what dignity she could. As she turned to leave, her gaze swept across the saloon one last time. That's when she noticed him, a man sitting alone in the back corner, partially hidden in shadow, while everyone else had stared at her with curiosity, or worse. He'd kept his attention on the glass of whiskey before him, but as she looked his way, he lifted his head, and their eyes met across the smoky room. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with several days' growth. His clothes marked him as a working man, worn denim, leather vest, a gun belt slung low on his hips. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of winter sky just before a storm, gray and distant, holding secrets she recognized because she carried her own. The moment stretched between them. Silent communication in a room full of noise. Then he deliberately placed his glass on the table with a soft thud and looked away, releasing her from whatever spell had briefly held them both. Ruby pushed back through the bat-wing doors into the cooling evening air. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her valise. Mrs. Watson's boarding house. Then, kitchen work. It was better than nothing, though the weight of her fall from grace pressed heavy on her shoulders. In Galveston, she'd been Miss O'Hara, respected nurse, trusted with the lives. Here, she was just another woman with a past, looking for a place to hide from it. The boarding house stood 2 buildings down, a narrow structure that seemed to lean slightly to the left, as if tired from fighting the constant prairie wind. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it Watson's Respectable Lodgings. Ruby knocked, and after a long moment, the door opened to reveal a thin woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. Mrs. Watson, Bill Murphy suggested you might have work available. The woman's gaze took in every detail of Ruby's appearance, from her dusty boots to her travel-weary face. You're not one of his girls? No, ma'am, I'm seeking respectable employment. Come from far. Galveston. Mrs. Watson's eyes narrowed slightly. That's a long way to come for kitchen work, running from something or someone. Ruby met her gaze steadily. I'm running toward a fresh start. Mrs. Watson, I'm willing to work hard, and I can provide references from... She paused. No, she couldn't provide references. Not anymore. I'm experienced in household management and cooking. The older woman studied her for another long moment, then stepped aside. I don't need kitchen help, but Murphy's got rooms above the saloon that need tending. The work's just cleaning. No interaction with the customers required. The last girl left sudden-like. Pays $2 a week plus a room at the back of this house. You interested? It wasn't what Ruby had hoped for, but it was work. And more importantly, it was work that wouldn't require her to compromise herself. Yes, ma'am, I'm interested. You can start tomorrow. Be at the saloon at dawn, before the place opens. You'll clean the rooms, wash the linens, keep the upper floor respectable. You don't go downstairs during business hours. You don't talk to the customers, and you especially don't get familiar with the girls. Murphy runs a business, not a charity. Understood. Perfectly understood. Mrs. Watson showed her to a small room at the rear of the house. It was sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single hook for clothes, but it was clean and private. After the boarding house keeper left, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her shoulders to sag. Through the thin walls, she could hear life continuing in Wind Hollow. Horses passing on the street, distant laughter from the saloon, a dog barking somewhere in the growing darkness. She was anonymous here, just another soul seeking refuge in a town that asked few questions as long as you kept to yourself and didn't cause trouble. Ruby unpacked her few possessions, 2 dresses, undergarments, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and tucked in the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, her nursing instruments. She ran her fingers over the leather case that held them. In another life, these tools had defined her, had given her purpose. Now they were just reminders of everything she'd lost because she'd tried to do the right thing. As night settled over Wind Hollow, Ruby prepared for bed in her small, strange room. Tomorrow she'd begin her new life as a cleaning woman in a frontier saloon. It wasn't the future she'd imagined for herself, but it was survival. And for now, that had to be enough. Just before she blew out her candle, she found herself thinking of the man in the corner of the saloon, the one who'd looked at her with those storm-colored eyes. There'd been something in his gaze. Not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. As if he too knew what it was like to be someone else once, before life had stripped away everything but the need to keep moving forward. She pushed the thought away. She couldn't afford connections, couldn't risk anyone looking too closely at Ruby May O'Hara or asking questions about why a trained nurse was scrubbing floors in a place like Wind Hollow. Tomorrow she'd start over, invisible and safe in her anonymity. But as sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of gray eyes and the soft thud of a whiskey glass being set down with deliberate care. Dawn came early in Wind Hollow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that did little to soften the harsh edges of the frontier town. Ruby rose before the first rooster crow, dressing quickly in her plainest work dress and pinning her hair severely back. She'd learned long ago that invisibility was a woman's best defense in uncertain situations. The streets were empty save for a few stray dogs and a drunk sleeping off his evening's indulgence against the side of the general store. Ruby's footsteps echoed on the wooden sidewalk as she made her way to the Broken Wheel. The saloon looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, less intimidating, just another weathered building trying to stand against time and elements. She entered through the back door as Mrs. Watson had instructed, finding herself in a narrow hallway that smelled of stale beer and lye soap. A bucket and mop waited against the wall, along with cleaning rags and a worn apron. Ruby tied the apron over her dress and got to work. The upstairs consisted of 6 rooms, 4 for the saloon girls and 2 that Murphy rented to travelers passing through. Ruby started with the empty traveler rooms, grateful for the solitude as she swept floors and changed linens. The work was hard but familiar. Before nursing school, she'd helped her mother take in washing to make ends meet. Her hands remembered the rhythm of honest labor. By the time she reached the occupied rooms, the sun was fully up, streaming through grimy windows that desperately needed attention. She knocked softly on the first door. "Come in," a sleepy voice called. The room belonged to a girl who couldn't have been more than 19, with bottle blonde hair and a face that might have been pretty without the harsh paint. She sat up in bed, pulling a wrapper around herself, and studied Ruby with curious eyes. "You're the new cleaning girl. Murphy mentioned he'd hired someone." The girl, Ruby would later learn her name was Violet, stretched like a cat. "What's a lady like you doing in a place like this?" Ruby kept her eyes on her work, shaking out the sheets. "Working, same as anyone." "Not the same," Violet said shrewdly. "You've got education written all over you. The way you hold yourself, the way you talk. You running from a husband." "No husband." Ruby smoothed the fresh sheets with practiced efficiency. "Man trouble of another kind. Then, it's always man trouble that brings women to places like this." Ruby said nothing, focusing on her tasks. After a moment, Violet shrugged and began preparing for her day. As Ruby worked, she couldn't help but notice the small attempts at gentility in the room. A painted fan on the dresser, a photograph in a cheap frame, a Bible tucked under clothing in a drawer. Even here, in this rough place, people tried to hold on to pieces of who they were or who they'd hoped to be. The pattern repeated in each room. The girls, Violet, Pearl, Daisy, and Catherine, watched her with mixtures of curiosity and caution. Ruby kept her interactions minimal, professional, Mrs. Watson had been clear about maintaining boundaries, and Ruby had no desire to invite questions about her own past. It was nearly noon when she finished the upstairs and moved to the back rooms behind the saloon proper. These were storage areas mostly, filled with crates of whiskey and beer, extra chairs, and supplies, but there was also a small room that served as Murphy's office and, surprisingly, what appeared to be makeshift living quarters, a cot, a wash basin, a trunk. Ruby was sweeping the office floor when she heard boots on the stairs. She tensed, ready to explain her presence, but relaxed slightly when she recognized the man who appeared, the same one who'd watched her from the corner table the night before. Up close and in daylight, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered but not old, marked by sun and wind and something else, a weariness that went bone deep. He wore the same clothes as the night before, though his dark hair was damp, as if he'd attempted to make himself presentable. When he saw her, he stopped short in the doorway. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, his voice low and rougher than she'd expected. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Ruby said, though her heart was racing. "I'm just cleaning. I'll be finished in a moment." He didn't move, just stood there studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "You're the woman from last night, the one looking for work." It wasn't a question, but Ruby nodded anyway. "I clean the rooms now, nothing more." Something shifted in his expression, understanding, perhaps, or approval. "Name's Callan Ridge," he said finally. "I stay here sometimes when I'm in town." "Ruby O'Hara," she replied, then wondered why she'd given her real name. She'd planned to be just Ruby, no surname, no connections to her past. "Miss O'Hara." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "You'll find Murphy's fair, long as you do your work and don't cause trouble. The girls are decent sorts, despite—" He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "They won't bother you if you don't bother them." "Thank you for the advice, Mr. Ridge." He shifted his weight, seeming uncomfortable with prolonged conversation. "I work the Garrett spread, few miles north, but I take meals here when I'm in town. You'll likely see me around." With that, he moved past her into the room. Going to the trunk in the corner, Ruby realized this was his space. He was one of the few permanent boarders Murphy kept. She gathered her cleaning supplies quickly, aware of his presence in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss O'Hara, this place, it's not kind to women who stand out. Might be better if you—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Might be better if you try to blend in, become part of the furniture, so to speak." Ruby looked back at him. He'd pulled a clean shirt from the trunk but hadn't put it on yet, standing there in his undershirt with his advice hanging between them. "Is that what you do, Mr. Ridge blend in?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Every day, ma'am, every blessed day." She left then, carrying her bucket and mop down the back stairs. But his words stayed with her as she finished her work. Blend in, become invisible. It was good advice, the kind born from experience. She wondered what had taught him that particular lesson. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Ruby found plenty to keep her busy, the windows she'd noticed earlier, the perpetually dusty corners, the back steps that looked like they hadn't seen a scrub brush in months. She worked steadily, keeping to the back areas of the saloon as instructed. Through the walls, she could hear the growing noise as the evening crowd began to gather. Murphy appeared as the sun was setting, inspecting her work with a critical eye. "You'll do," he said finally, which Ruby took as high praise. "Same time tomorrow. And Miss O'Hara, what Callan told you about blending in. He's right. The less notice you draw, the easier your time here will be." Ruby nodded, untying her apron. As she prepared to leave, movement caught her eye. Callan had taken his usual table in the corner, a glass of whiskey before him. But unlike last night, he wasn't alone. A man sat across from him, younger, flashier, with the look of someone who thought highly of himself. They were deep in conversation, but as Ruby passed, Callan's eyes found hers for just a moment. There was warning in that glance. Ruby didn't need to be told twice. She slipped out the back door into the gathering dusk, making her way quickly to Mrs. Watson's boarding house. Only when she was safe in her small room did she allow herself to process the day. It had gone better than expected. The work was hard but manageable, and she'd avoided any real interactions that might lead to questions about her past. But as she prepared her simple supper of bread and cheese, she found herself thinking about Callan Ridge. There was a story there, hidden beneath his quiet manner and watchful eyes. He'd recognized something in her, perhaps the same thing she'd seen in him. Two people trying to disappear in plain sight, hoping the world would forget to look too closely. Later, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the distant sounds from the saloon, Ruby allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. She had work, shelter, and food. She was hundreds of miles from Galveston and the scandal that had destroyed her life there. Maybe, just maybe, she could build something new here. Not the life she'd planned, but a life nonetheless. Tomorrow she would rise early again, tie on her apron, and clean the rooms above the Broken Wheel Saloon. She would keep her head down, work hard, and slowly fade into the background of Wind Hollow until Ruby May O'Hara, disgraced nurse, ceased to exist. In her place would be just Ruby, the cleaning woman who kept to herself and caused no trouble. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was what she had. And for now, like Callan Ridge with his corner table and watchful eyes, she would make it enough. The first snow of winter came early to Wind Hollow, dusting the town in white that quickly turned to muddy slush under boots and wagon wheels. Ruby had been working at the Broken Wheel for 3 weeks now, falling into a rhythm that kept her busy and, more importantly, invisible. She rose before dawn, worked through the morning, and retreated to her room before the saloon came fully alive with its nightly revelries. It was a Tuesday evening, later than she usually stayed. Murphy had asked her to inventory the storage room, and the task had taken longer than expected. The saloon was quiet for once, the weather keeping all but the most dedicated drinkers at home. Ruby was counting bottles in the back storage area when she heard a crash from outside, followed by the sharp whinny of a distressed horse. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern and pushed through the back door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving snow into her face. Through the swirling white, she could make out shapes near the stable, an overturned freight wagon, its contents scattered across the frozen ground, and a figure struggling to calm a panicked horse. Ruby recognized Callan's voice before she could see him clearly, speaking low and steady to the animal. As she drew closer, lantern held high, she saw the problem. The wagon had clipped the stable fence, and Callan had been caught between them. He was standing, but his left arm hung at an awkward angle, and even in the dim light, she could see the dark stain spreading across his sleeve. "Mr. Ridge," she called over the wind. "You're hurt." He turned at her voice, his face tight with pain. "Miss O'Hara, you shouldn't be out here. Go on back inside." Ruby ignored him, setting the lantern on a fence post and moving closer. The horse had calmed somewhat, though it still stamped nervously. "Let me see your arm." "It's nothing, just a scratch." "A scratch doesn't bleed like that." Her nurse's training overrode her careful maintenance of distance. "Can you make it inside? That wound needs tending." He studied her for a long moment, snow collecting on his hat and shoulders. "You know about doctoring?" The question hung between them, dangerous as thin ice. Ruby chose her words carefully. "I know enough to see that you'll bleed to death standing here arguing about it." Something shifted in his expression. Acceptance, perhaps, or simple practicality winning over pride. He nodded once, then swayed slightly on his feet, without thinking. Ruby moved to his good side, letting him lean on her as they made their way back to the saloon. The main room was nearly empty, just Murphy behind the bar and 2 old-timers nursing whiskeys by the stove. They looked up as Ruby helped Callan inside, but something in her expression kept them from asking questions. "Storage room," Callan muttered. "Don't want to cause a fuss." Ruby guided him to the small room off the back hallway where she'd been working. It was cramped but private. With a table she quickly cleared of inventory sheets. Callan sank onto a crate, his face gray beneath his tan. "I need to see the wound," Ruby said, her voice slipping into the calm efficiency she'd used in the hospital. "Can you remove your coat?" He tried, wincing as he moved his injured arm. Ruby helped him ease out of the heavy garment, then carefully rolled up his shirt sleeve. The gash ran from elbow to mid-forearm, deep enough to need stitching but thankfully missing any major vessels. "You're lucky," she said, examining the wound with practiced eyes. A few inches over and it would have hit an artery. Callan watched her face as she worked. noting the change in her demeanor. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Ruby met his gaze briefly, then turned away. "I need clean water, whiskey, and cloth for bandages. There's a sewing kit in my cleaning supplies. I'll need that too." "Planning to stitch me up like a torn shirt. Unless you'd prefer to ride to the next town for a doctor." "In this weather, you might make it halfway before you pass out from blood loss." He was quiet for a moment. "The whiskey's for cleaning the wound, I suppose." "Some of it." Ruby allowed herself a small smile. "The rest might help with the pain." She gathered what she needed quickly. Aware that each moment increased the chance of someone asking questions she didn't want to answer. When she returned, Callan had his eyes closed. Though she could tell from his breathing he wasn't unconscious. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the wound. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Ruby worked quickly, cleaning the gash thoroughly before threading her needle. Her hands remembered the motions, even though her mind tried to push away memories of the last time she'd done this. The night everything had gone wrong in Galveston. "You're good at this," Callan said, his voice tight as she began stitching. He'd taken a long pull from the whiskey bottle, but was remarkably steady for a man having his arm sewn up without laudanum. "Hold still," Ruby murmured, concentrating on keeping her stitches even. "Almost done." She worked in silence after that, aware of his eyes on her face. When she finished, she wrapped the arm carefully with clean cloth, tying it off with precise knots. "There. Keep it clean and dry. The stitches should come out in a week." She began gathering the bloody cloths. Not meeting his eyes. "You were lucky. No serious damage." "Lucky." He flexed his fingers experimentally, wincing. "That's one word for it." He paused, then asked quietly, "Where'd you train?" Ruby's hand stilled. "I don't know what you mean." "No cleaning woman stitches like that. Those are surgeon's knots." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "Finally," Ruby said, "we all have things we don't talk about. Mr. Ridge, I respect your privacy. I'd appreciate the same courtesy." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Miss O'Hara, your secrets are your own." He stood carefully, testing his balance. "What do I owe you for the doctoring?" "Nothing. Just be careful and keep that wound clean." He pulled his coat back on with her help, favoring the injured arm. At the door, he turned back. "Miss O'Hara, thank you, and don't worry. I know how to keep my mouth shut." After he left, Ruby cleaned up the evidence of her medical intervention, hands shaking slightly now that the crisis had passed. She'd revealed too much, shown skills that raised questions about her past. But she couldn't have stood by and let him bleed. Couldn't have turned off the instincts that had defined her for so long. When she finally made it back to her room at the boarding house, Ruby sat on her bed and unwrapped the leather case containing her nursing instruments. She ran her fingers over the familiar tools, remembering the pride she'd felt the day she'd received them. They represented everything she'd worked for, everything she'd lost. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Galveston, she'd use them again. Use them to help someone who asked no questions, demanded no explanations, someone who understood the value of keeping secrets. Through her small window, she could see snow still falling, covering Wind Hollow in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Tomorrow the sun would reveal the mud underneath. But for tonight, the town looked transformed. Ruby carefully rewrapped her instruments and tucked them away. She'd crossed a line tonight, revealed a piece of herself she'd meant to keep hidden. But as she prepared for bed, she found she didn't regret it. Callan Ridge would keep her secret, just as she would keep his, whatever they might be. The wind howled outside, rattling her window. But Ruby felt strangely peaceful. She'd been running from who she was for weeks now, trying to disappear into a role that didn't fit. Tonight had reminded her that some parts of ourselves refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep we try to hide them. As sleep finally took her, She thought she understood why Callan Ridge spent his evenings in that corner table, watching the world while trying to remain apart from it. Sometimes the hardest thing wasn't hiding from others. It was hiding from yourself. The market square in Wind Hollow came alive every Saturday morning. Ranchers and farmers bringing their goods to trade while townsfolk emerged to purchase supplies for the week ahead. Ruby had taken to doing her shopping early, hoping to avoid the crowds, but this particular morning she'd been delayed by extra work at the saloon. She was examining vegetables at Werner's stand, carefully counting her coins, when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, I'll be damned. Ruby May O'Hara. She turned slowly, her basket gripping tightly in her hands. Doctor. Marcus Thornton stood before her, dressed in the fine clothes of a traveling physician, his smile sharp as a scalpel. She'd known him in Galveston. He'd been on the hospital board, one of the men who'd refused to believe her testimony during the inquiry. "A doctor, Thornton," she managed, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're far from home." "As are you, my dear." His eyes traveled over her plain dress and work-worn hands. "Though I must say, your circumstances appear to have changed considerably since we last met." Around them, the market continued its busy chatter, but Ruby felt several people glancing their way, drawn by Thornton's cultured tones and obvious prosperity. "I'm making an honest living," she said quietly. "Honest?" Thornton's laugh was ugly. "That's rich, coming from you. Do these good people know what you did? How you violated your oath, endangered lives with your reckless—" "That's enough." The voice came from behind Ruby, low and dangerous. She didn't need to turn to know Callan Ridge stood there. She could feel his presence like a wall at her back. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "This is a private conversation. Sir, I suggest you move along." "I suggest you do the same," Callan replied evenly. "The lady's made it clear she doesn't wish to speak with you." "The lady?" Thornton's voice rose, drawing more attention. "This woman is no lady. She's a disgrace to the medical profession. In Galveston, In Galveston, she's not." Callan interrupted. "This is Wind Hollow. Whatever happens somewhere else stays there." Thornton pulled himself up to his full height, which still left him several inches shorter than Callan. "Do you know who I am? I could buy and sell this entire town." "Then you can afford a ticket on the next stage out." Callan's hand rested casually on his gun belt, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. "Which leaves in an hour." The market had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Ruby stood frozen between the two men, her past and present colliding in the dusty square. She could see Mrs. Watson near the fabric stall, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Murphy had emerged from the saloon, drawn by the commotion. Even some of the saloon girls peered from upper windows. Thornton's face flushed red. "You dare threaten me, I'll have the sheriff." "Sheriff's in Amarillo till Tuesday," someone called out. Ruby recognized the voice as belonging to Sam, one of the regular customers at the Broken Wheel. "Won't be back for days." The crowd seemed to shift subtly, forming a loose circle that somehow placed Thornton on the outside. Ruby realized with a start that they were protecting her, not because they knew her story or even liked her particularly, but because she was one of theirs now, and he was an outsider throwing his weight around. Thornton seemed to realize it too. His eyes darted around the assembled faces, finding no sympathy. This is outrageous. You're harboring a woman who works hard and minds her own business." Murphy's voice cut through. The saloon owner had pushed through the crowd, his massive frame commanding attention, which is more than I can say for some folks. "You'll regret this." Thornton spat, but he was already backing away. "All of you. When word gets out about what kind of woman you're protecting." "What kind of woman?" It was Violet who spoke, having come down from the saloon. She stood with her hands on her hips, chin raised defiantly. A woman trying to make an honest living. Seems to me we got plenty of those here. Pearl and Daisy flanked her, and even prim Mrs. Watson stepped forward, her expression stern. Doctor Thornton, was it? I believe you were told the stage leaves in an hour. I suggest you be on it. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Finally, with a last venomous look at Ruby, he turned and stalked away toward the hotel. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in low murmurs. Ruby stood trembling, unable to process what had just happened. These people who barely knew her, had stood up for her against a man of influence and wealth. You all right? Callan's voice was quiet, meant only for her. Ruby nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was acutely aware that everyone now knew she had a past, something scandalous enough to bring a man like Thornton all the way from Galveston. Come on, Murphy said gruffly. You look like you could use a drink. On the house. Ruby shook her head. I should. I have work to finish. Work can wait, Mrs. Watson said firmly. Murphy's right. You need to sit down before you fall down. They guided her back to the saloon, an odd procession of saloon girls, respectable townspeople, and one silent cowboy. Murphy poured whiskey while the women fussed around her, bringing water and a cool cloth for her forehead. You don't have to tell us nothing, Pearl said gently. We all got stories we don't tell. That's right, Violet added. Man like that, throwing his weight around, trying to shame a good woman, he's the one who should be ashamed. Ruby finally found her voice. You don't know what he was talking about. What if he was right? What if I did do something terrible? Did you, Mrs. Watson asked bluntly. Ruby met her eyes. I tried to save someone I wasn't supposed to save. A woman of low reputation. She was dying, and the hospital board said not to waste resources on her kind. I did anyway. She lived, but there were complications. They blamed me for everything that went wrong after. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Violet laughed, sharp and bitter. So your crime was treating someone like me as a human being worth saving. That's what they call terrible now. Pearl shook her head. Sounds to me like you did right. The board didn't see it that way. My supervising physician, he said I'd overstepped, acted without authority. They revoked my nursing certification, made sure I couldn't work at any hospital in Texas. Their loss. Murphy said simply, You've been nothing but honest and hardworking since you got here. That's all that matters to me. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. I don't understand. Why are you all being so kind? Wind Hollow's full of people running from something, Sam said from his spot at the bar. We don't ask too many questions because we don't want them asked of us. You're one of ours now. We take care of our own. Through it all, Callan had stood quietly by the door, watching. Now he moved forward, placing something on the table in front of Ruby. It was a handkerchief, clean and pressed. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I've known men who called themselves doctors who wouldn't cross the street to help a dying man if he couldn't pay. Seems to me the world could use more people willing to do what's right instead of what's profitable. Ruby took the handkerchief with trembling fingers, touched beyond words by the simple gesture. When she looked up, Callan was already moving toward the door. Where are you going? Murphy called. Making sure our friend catches that stage. Callan replied without turning. Wouldn't want him to miss it. After he left, the gathering slowly dispersed. The saloon girls went to prepare for the evening's business. Mrs. Watson returned to her boarding house, and Murphy went back to his bar. But each of them paused to squeeze Ruby's shoulder or offer a word of encouragement. Finally, alone in the quiet afternoon saloon, Ruby carefully folded Callan's handkerchief. She'd come to Wind Hollow seeking anonymity, hoping to disappear. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. A community that judged her not by her past, but by her present. People who understood that sometimes doing right came with a terrible cost. Later, as she resumed her work upstairs, Ruby heard the stagecoach rattle out of town. She didn't look out the window. Didn't need to see Thornton's departure. That part of her life was truly behind her now. Exorcised not by running from it, but by facing it with unexpected allies at her side. That evening, when Callan took his usual table in the corner, Ruby did something she'd never done before. She brought him a fresh glass of whiskey, setting it down with a quiet, "Thank you." He looked up at her, those storm-gray eyes holding warmth she hadn't seen before. "No need for thanks. Miss O'Hara, man was out of line."
"Still," Ruby said softly, "what you did, what you all did."
"Like Sam said," Callan replied, "we take care of our own." As Ruby returned to her work, she felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since leaving Galveston, she wasn't just hiding in Wind Hollow. She was home. The knock came just past midnight, urgent and unsteady. Ruby had been lying awake, listening to the winter wind rattle her window. When the sound broke through the night's quiet rhythm, she rose quickly, wrapping her shawl around her nightgown, and peered through the crack in her door. Callan Ridge stood in the boarding house hallway, swaying slightly, one hand braced against the wall. His coat was askew, his hat missing, and even in the dim lamplight she could see the glassy sheen in his eyes. "Mr. Ridge," she whispered, alarmed. "Are you ill?" "Miss O'Hara." His voice was thick, slurred with whiskey. I need to talk to you." "It's late," Ruby said carefully, aware of how this might look. A drunk cowboy at her door in the middle of the night. Perhaps in the morning. "Please." The word came out broken, desperate. "I know I got no right to ask, but please." Something in his voice, the raw pain beneath the whiskey, made her decision. She opened the door wider. Gesturing him inside, he entered carefully, as if afraid of breaking something, and stood awkwardly in the small space. "Sit," Ruby said, indicating the single chair, "before you fall." He sank into it gratefully, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Up close, she could smell the whiskey on him, but also something else, smoke and leather and the cold night air. His knuckles were scraped, as if he'd been in a fight. "You're hurt," she observed. "No." He shook his head, then winced at the movement. "Not hurt, just drunk, very drunk." He looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes, now clouded with alcohol and something deeper. "You asked why I came here." Ruby pulled her shawl tighter. "Mr. Ridge." "Callan," he interrupted. Just Callan tonight, please." She nodded slowly. "Callan, you should go back to your room. Sleep this off." "Can't sleep." His laugh was bitter. "Haven't slept proper in 2 years, 3 lost count." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "You think I came here for whiskey?" The words were so unexpected that Ruby blinked. What?" "The saloon, every night. You think I go there for the whiskey?" He looked up at her again, and the naked vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "No, I go there to not be alone, to hear voices, laughter, to pretend I'm part of something again." Ruby moved carefully to sit on the edge of her bed, maintaining proper distance but close enough to hear his low voice. "Callan, why are you telling me this?" "Because you understand," he said simply. "Saw it that first night. The way you looked, like you were carrying something too heavy to put down, like you knew what it was to lose everything that mattered." "You're drunk," Ruby said gently. "You don't know what you're saying." "Drunk, yes, wrong, no." He fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out a small, worn photograph. His hands shook as he held it out to her. Her name was Sarah. Ruby took the photograph carefully. It showed a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, standing in front of a small farmhouse. She was beautiful in the way of women who worked hard and loved deeply. "Your wife." "Would have been," Callan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. We were to be married come spring. I'd saved for 2 years, bought a piece of land outside Abilene, built a house with my own hands, every board perfect because it was for her. Ruby waited, sensing there was more, knowing sometimes the best medicine was simply being heard. Fire took it all, he continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. I was away, delivering horses to Fort Worth. Barn caught first, nobody knows how. Wind carried it to the house. Sarah. She tried to save the horses. Always did love animals more than was sensible. His voice broke on the last word. Ruby's heart clenched, but she remained silent, letting him speak. They found her in the doorway. Doctor said the smoke got her before the flames. Small mercy. He called it. Callan laughed, the sound sharp and painful. Mercy? Like there was anything merciful about a 22-year-old woman dying alone while I was 3 days away, thinking about the profit I'd make, the wedding dress it would buy her. It wasn't your fault, Ruby said softly. Wasn't it? He met her eyes, challenging. I left her alone, chose money over being there, and for what the horses died anyway. The land's worthless now. Can't even look at it without seeing. He trailed off, taking the photograph back with reverent care. After that, I couldn't stay still. Tried to outrun it, I guess, town to town, job to job. Wind Hollow's just the latest stop. But you've stayed here longer than the others, Ruby observed. Why? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then you. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Ruby's breath caught. Not like that, Callan said quickly, seeing her expression. I mean, that first night, seeing you walk into that saloon, head high despite being scared, despite being alone. It was like looking in a mirror. And then you stayed, kept working, kept fighting, made me think maybe running wasn't the only way. He stood abruptly, swaying again. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. Shouldn't have. You got your own troubles without listening to mine. Sit down, Ruby said firmly. You're in no state to navigate stairs. Can't stay here? People would talk. People always talk. Sit down before you fall down. He obeyed, sinking back into the chair. Ruby poured water from her pitcher into the basin, wet a cloth, and handed it to him. For your face, it'll help with the morning headache. He took it gratefully, pressing the cool cloth to his forehead. Why are you being kind to me? I showed up drunk at your door in the middle of the night, rambling about things that don't concern you. Because, Ruby said carefully, I know what it's like to carry ghosts, and I know what it's like to need someone to just listen, without judging. Without trying to fix it. Your man in Galveston, Callan said, the one who died because you tried to save someone. Not my man, Ruby corrected softly. A patient, a woman named Maria Santos. She worked in a house of ill repute, came in bleeding, dying. The board said not to waste resources, that her kind brought it on themselves, but I looked at her and saw someone's daughter, someone's sister. So I treated her anyway. And she lived. For 3 days. Ruby's voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. Infection set in. They said if I'd followed protocol, used the approved treatments instead of the newer methods I'd learned, she might have survived longer, maybe even recovered fully. They blamed her death on my arrogance, my refusal to follow orders. But you don't believe that. It wasn't a question. Ruby shook her head. She would have died that first night without treatment. I gave her 3 more days. 3 days to say goodbye to her sister. To make peace. That matters. Doesn't it? Even if the medical board disagreed. It matters, Callan said firmly. Then, softer. You think I came here for whiskey? No, I came to sleep next to you. Ruby stiffened, but he held up a hand quickly. I don't mean just to be near someone who understands, to not be alone with the ghosts for one night. I know I got no right to ask, but... Ruby looked at him, this strong, broken man who'd shown up at her door carrying his pain like a physical weight. She thought of her own sleepless nights, the way the darkness pressed in with memories and regrets. "You can stay," she said quietly, "in the chair, just for tonight." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you," he whispered. Ruby climbed back into her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She left the lamp burning low, casting soft shadows around the room. Callan settled into the chair, his breathing gradually evening out as exhaustion and whiskey pulled him toward sleep. "Ruby?" His voice was drowsy, almost childlike. "Yes. Do you think they forgive us, the ones we've failed?" Ruby stared at the ceiling, considering. I think they'd want us to forgive ourselves, to find a way to keep living, not just existing." A long pause. "That sounds harder." "Yes," Ruby agreed softly. "It is." Soon his breathing deepened into true sleep. Ruby lay awake a while longer, listening to the wind outside and the quiet presence of another wounded soul finding temporary peace. It wasn't proper, wasn't wise, but somehow it felt right. Two people who'd lost their way, finding a moment's comfort in shared understanding. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Questions from Mrs. Watson if she'd heard the late-night knock. Looks from anyone who might have seen Callan enter. But tonight, in this small room above a frontier town, two broken people had found something they'd both been searching for without knowing it, the simple grace of not being alone with their pain. As sleep finally claimed her, Ruby thought she understood why Callan had really come to her door. It wasn't about whiskey or even desire. It was about the human need for connection, for someone to witness our grief and say, "Yes, I see you. Yes, it matters. Yes, you can rest here for a while." In the chair, Callan shifted in his sleep, his face relaxing for the first time in longer than he could remember. And in the narrow bed, Ruby found her own rest, no longer quite so alone in the darkness. The morning after Callan's late-night visit passed without incident. He'd slipped out before dawn, leaving only a carefully folded blanket on the chair and a sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. They didn't speak of that night directly, but Ruby noticed small changes. Callan began taking his evening meals earlier. When the saloon was quieter, sometimes they'd exchange a few words, observations about the weather, news from neighboring towns, nothing too personal. But beneath the mundane conversations ran an undercurrent of understanding. It was 3 weeks later when the past found them both again. Ruby was hanging laundry behind the boarding house, enjoying the first warm day of early spring, when she heard horses approaching. Not unusual in itself, but something about the purposeful rhythm made her look up. 3 riders were coming down the main street, and even from a distance, she could see they weren't ordinary travelers. The lead rider was a woman, sitting her horse with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. Her dark hair was pinned up properly, but she wore men's riding clothes, split skirt, leather vest, gun belt. Behind her rode 2 men who had the look of hired hands, alert and watchful. Ruby watched them tie up outside the saloon, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. The woman moved with purpose, pushing through the bat-wing doors like she knew exactly what she was looking for. 20 minutes later, Violet came running. "Ruby, you need to come quick. There's a woman asking after Callan, and he's not taking it well." Ruby dried her hands, mind racing. "Who is she?" "Don't know, but she's got money and meanness, that's for sure. Murphy's trying to keep things calm, but Callan looks like he's seen a ghost." Ruby hurried to the saloon, entering through the back door. She could hear voices from the main room, a woman's, cultured and sharp, and Murphy's low rumble, moving quietly to where she could see without being seen. Ruby peered into the barroom. The woman stood near Callan's usual table, her bearing regal despite the rough surroundings. She was perhaps 35, handsome rather than pretty, with the kind of face that had seen too much to hold on to softness. 3 years, Callan, she was saying.
3 years I've been looking for you.
Callan sat frozen at his table, his face pale beneath his tan.
How did you find me? Margaret?
Money opens doors and mouths. She pulled out a chair and sat uninvited. You didn't think you could just disappear, did you, not after everything? After everything, Callan's voice was dangerous now. You mean after your father burned down my farm, after Sarah died because of his greed? Ruby's breath caught. This wasn't what she'd expected. Margaret's composure cracked slightly.
That's not... Father didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. He only wanted to force you to sell.
The fire was supposed to stay contained to the barn. Supposed to? Callan laughed bitterly. Well, it didn't. And Sarah paid the price for your father's ambition.
He's dead, Margaret said quietly. Father had a stroke last winter, on his deathbed. He confessed everything. How he'd paid men to set the fire, how it went wrong. He asked me to find you, to make amends.
Callan was on his feet now, the chair scraping back. Amends. You think money can bring her back? Think it can give me back those 3 days I wasn't there, the life we were going to build?
No.
Margaret's voice was steady, but Ruby could see her hands trembling.
But I can give you justice. The men who set the fire, I know who they are. I have proof. And I can give you the land, all of Father's holdings around Abilene. It's what he wanted.
What he wanted. Callan slammed his fist on the table. What about what Sarah wanted? She wanted to raise horses, have children, grow old on that little farm. She wanted to live. Margaret, can your father's guilty conscience give her that? The saloon had gone dead quiet, everyone watching the drama unfold. Ruby found herself moving forward, drawn by an instinct to protect, though from what she wasn't sure.
Callan.
She spoke his name softly, but he turned to her immediately, something wild in his eyes. Ruby. He said her name like an anchor, grounding himself.
I
know, she said simply. She looked at Margaret, taking in the woman's expensive clothes, her defensive posture. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued somewhere more private. Margaret's gaze sharpened as she studied Ruby.
And you are someone who cares about his well-being,
Ruby replied evenly.
I see.
Margaret's tone suggested she saw quite a lot. Another woman in Callan's life. He always did attract protective types. Margaret, Callan's voice held warning. The woman sighed, suddenly looking tired. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to try to make right what can be made right. Father's sins have haunted me too. Callan, Sarah was my friend. Remember before Father decided your land was in the way of his empire? I remember, Callan said quietly. I remember you tried to warn us.
Too little, too late.
Margaret stood, pulling a leather portfolio from her saddlebag.
These are the documents, proof of what Father did. Deeds to the land, bank drafts. It's all yours. Whether you want it or not, what you do with it. She shrugged. That's your choice. I've left my direction at the hotel if you want to pursue justice through the law.
She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth. I'm sorry, Sarah deserved better. You both did. After she left, Callan sank back into his chair, the portfolio lying on the table like a snake. The saloon slowly returned to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Ruby sat down across from Callan, waiting. Her father was Samuel Morrison, he said finally. Biggest rancher in 3 counties. Wanted my land because it had the best water access. I wouldn't sell. He touched the portfolio with one finger, as if it might burn. So he decided to force the issue. And Margaret was Sarah's friend from school. Tried to warn us something was coming, but we didn't listen. Thought we were too small for Morrison to bother with. His laugh was hollow. Pride. It's always pride that gets you in the end. Ruby reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately since that night in her room. His skin was warm, calloused from work. "What will you do?" He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. "I don't know. For 3 years, I've thought about revenge. What I'd do if I ever found out who was responsible. Now." He looked at their joined hands. "Now I find I'm tired of carrying all this hate. It's heavy, Ruby. So damn heavy." "Then put it down," she said softly. "You don't have to forgive. You don't have to forget. But you can choose to stop letting it control your life." "Like you have." Ruby smiled sadly. "I'm trying. Some days are better than others." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still linked across the scarred table. "Finally." Callan squeezed her fingers gently and let go. "Will you help me?" he asked. "Go through these papers. I trust your judgment more than my own right now." "Of course." They spent the afternoon in the back room, spreading out the documents Margaret had left. The evidence was damning signed confessions, bank records showing payments to the arsonists, even a letter in Samuel Morrison's own hand outlining his plan. The land deeds were legitimate, the bank drafts substantial. "You could rebuild," Ruby said carefully. "Start over on the same land." "Could I?" Callan looked at her. Every time I'd look at it, I'd see her, see what was supposed to be. Then sell it. Use the money to build something new, something that honors her memory without trapping you in it. He was quiet for a long time, studying her face. "You ever think about starting over? Really starting over? Not just running to a new place with the same old ghosts?" "Sometimes," Ruby admitted. "But it seems like the ghosts always find a way to follow. Maybe that's because we're meant to make peace with them, not outrun them." He gathered up the papers carefully. "I need to think about all this." "But Ruby, thank you for being here, for—" He gestured helplessly. "For understanding," she supplied. "That, and for reminding me I'm more than my worst day. Sarah would have liked you. I think she always said I needed someone sensible to keep me from brooding too much." Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Callan smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "She was sunshine and laughter and terrible cooking. She burned everything but somehow made it taste good anyway. She would have hated that I've spent 3 years in the dark." "So come into the light," Ruby said simply. "Choose to live, not for her, not for anyone else, for yourself." That night, Callan didn't come to the saloon. Ruby found herself watching the door, worried, until Violet mentioned she'd seen him at the church, sitting in the back pew, making peace, perhaps, or at least beginning the long journey toward it. When he finally appeared the next evening, something had changed in his bearing. He still carried grief that would never fully leave, but it no longer bent him quite so low. He caught Ruby's eye as she passed with her cleaning supplies and nodded once. A world of communication in that simple gesture. Later, as Ruby prepared for bed, she thought about the strange paths that had brought them both to Wind Hollow. 2 damaged souls, running from different tragedies, finding in each other, not healing. That would take time. But the possibility of it, the understanding that you could survive the worst life threw at you and still choose to keep going. Outside her window, the stars were bright in the clear Texas sky. Somewhere out there was the land where Callan had built his dreams and lost them. Somewhere was Galveston, where Ruby had tried to do right and been punished for it. But here, in this moment, in this small room above a frontier town, there was the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time in a very long while, that felt like enough. Spring arrived in Wind Hollow with a burst of wildflowers and sudden thunderstorms that turned the dusty streets to mud. Ruby had taken to spending her free afternoons working on the neglected plot of land behind the boarding house, coaxing vegetables from the hard-packed earth. It was there that Callan found her one Sunday, kneeling in the dirt with her sleeves rolled up, completely absorbed in her task. "Mrs." Watson said I'd find you here, he said, causing her to look up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun.
Callan. She sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands.
What brings you by?
He held up a small burlap sack. Seeds. Thought you might could use them. Sarah kept a kitchen garden, had seeds stored away for plants she never got to grow. Found them when I went back to settle things with the land.
Ruby's breath caught. He'd gone back to Abilene, faced those memories.
How was it?
Hard, he admitted, settling himself on an overturned crate near her garden plot. But necessary. Sold the land to a young couple just starting out. Seemed right, somehow. New dreams on old ground. She took the seed packet he offered, handling it reverently.
Thank you. I'll take good care of them.
They worked in companionable silence for a while, Callan helping her build raised beds from scrap lumber he'd brought. As the sun tracked across the sky, Ruby became aware of him watching her, something unreadable in his expression.
What?
She asked, self-conscious suddenly of her dirt-smudged face and simple work dress. You hum when you're happy, he said. Did you know that little tunes, under your breath? You were doing it just now. Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks.
I didn't realize.
It's nice, he said simply. Been a long time since I heard happy sounds without whiskey involved. They returned to work, but the awareness between them had shifted, become something warmer. When Callan's hand brushed hers as they reached for the same tool, neither pulled away immediately. As shadows lengthened, they surveyed their afternoon's work. 3 neat raised beds ready for planting, a small fence to keep out rabbits. Looks good, Callan said, but he was looking at Ruby when he said it, taking in her flushed cheeks and bright eyes.
Yes,
she agreed softly, not talking about the garden at all. That night, Ruby lay in her narrow bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the afternoon, to the way Callan had looked at her, to the warmth that had bloomed in her chest when he'd smiled. Restless, she rose and went to her window, staring out at the star-filled sky. A soft knock at her door made her heart skip. She knew who it was before she opened it. Callan stood in the hallway, hat in hand, stone-cold sober this time. I know it's late. Come in, Ruby said, stepping aside. He entered, filling the small room with his presence. I've been trying to sleep, but I keep thinking about this afternoon. About you.
Ruby's pulse quickened. Callan?
Let me say this, he interrupted gently. I've been dead inside for 3 years. Thought that was my penance, my way of honoring Sarah's memory. But lately, he met her eyes. Lately, I catch myself thinking about tomorrow, about possibilities. And that's because of you. We're both carrying too much hurt, Ruby said, though her voice shook.
I don't know if either of us is ready for whatever this is.
Maybe not, he agreed. But I'm tired of being alone with it. Aren't you? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ruby thought of her solitary nights, of the weight of secrets and shame she carried. Then she looked at Callan, this good man who'd lost everything and was still brave enough to reach for something new.
Yes,
she whispered.
I'm tired of being alone.
He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his work-rough hands. Ruby, Shh, she placed her fingers over his lips. No promises, no expectations, just be here with me. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she might break. Ruby leaned into him, feeling walls she'd built around her heart begin to crumble. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Stay, she said. And this time it wasn't about ghosts or loneliness. It was about 2 people choosing each other, choosing to step toward light instead of remaining in darkness. Callan pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Ruby, I talk in my sleep sometimes. About the fire, about Sarah. I don't want to.
I know,
she said.
I have nightmares too. About the hospital, about failing people who needed me. We'll weather them together.
He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Ruby felt something inside her that had been frozen begin to thaw. They moved together naturally. Two people who'd forgotten they could feel anything but pain, rediscovering gentleness in each other's arms. Later, as they lay entwined in her narrow bed, Callan traced lazy patterns on Ruby's bare shoulder. "What's my name in your dreams?" he asked softly. The question puzzled her. "What do you mean?" "When you dream about the future, if you do, am I in them? What do you call me?" Ruby turned in his arms to face him. "I haven't dared dream about the future in a long time. Maybe it's time to start again," he suggested. "Both of us." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "In my dreams, you're just Callan, the man who makes me forget to be afraid." "And you're Ruby," he murmured against her hair. "The woman who reminded me I still have a heart." They talked through the night, sharing pieces of themselves they'd kept hidden. Callan spoke of his childhood on a ranch in West Texas, of parents taken by fever when he was 15. Ruby told him about growing up poor in Houston, how becoming a nurse had been her way of making meaning from hardship. "I wanted to help people," she said, "to be the person who could make things better when everything seemed lost." "You are that person," Callan said firmly. "What happened in Galveston doesn't change that." As dawn approached, they made quiet plans. Callan would move his things from the saloon to a room at the boarding house, more respectable, he said with a wry smile. They would court properly, or as properly as two people with their histories could manage. "People will talk," Ruby warned. "Let them," Callan said. "I'm done living my life based on what others think. Aren't you?" She kissed him in answer, feeling reckless and free for the first time in years. When he left just before sunrise to maintain some semblance of propriety, Ruby stood at her window watching him walk down the empty street. His stride was different. She noticed stronger, more purposeful, as if he'd remembered where he was going. The next few days passed in a blur of stolen glances and brief touches when no one was looking. The change in both of them was apparent to anyone who cared to notice. Violet cornered Ruby while she was cleaning, grinning knowingly. "About time," the saloon girl said. "That man's been pining after you for months." "I don't know what you mean," Ruby said, but her blush gave her away. "Sure you don't," Violet laughed. "Just be happy. Honey, Lord knows there's little enough of that in this world." Murphy, for his part, simply grunted when Callan announced he was moving to the boarding house. "Figured that was coming," was all he said. But Ruby caught him smiling into his whiskey later. The real test came from Mrs. Watson, who fixed Ruby with her sharp gaze over breakfast. "I run a respectable establishment," she said sternly. "Yes, ma'am," Ruby replied, meeting her eyes steadily. "That means no scandals, no midnight visits, no behavior that would reflect poorly on my house." "I understand." Mrs. Watson studied her for a long moment. Then her expression softened fractionally. "That being said, I'm not blind. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you've been smiling more in the past week than in all the months you've been here. Just be discreet and happy. You deserve a bit of happiness, girl." That evening, Callan knocked on Ruby's door at a respectable hour, dressed in his best clothes and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Miss O'Hara," he said formally, though his eyes danced with mirth, "would you do me the honor of taking a walk?" She took his arm, and they strolled through town as the sun set, not caring who saw them. Let people talk, Ruby thought. She'd already lost one life to scandal. She wouldn't lose another to fear. As they walked, Callan murmured in her ear, "What's my name in your dreams now?" Ruby smiled, squeezing his arm. "You're the man who came to my door looking for peace and gave me hope instead." "And you," he replied, "are the woman who opened that door and saved us both." They walked on into the gathering dusk. Two people who'd thought their best days were behind them, discovering that perhaps they were just beginning. Word of Ruby and Callan's courtship spread through Wind Hollow like wildfire through dry grass. For the most part, folks seemed pleased. There was something satisfying about two lost souls finding each other. But not everyone approved of the match between a saloon-cleaning woman with a mysterious past and a cowboy who'd drunk away 3 years of his life. The whispers started small. Ruby heard them at the general store, saw them in the sideways glances at church. That woman from Galveston, they said. No good can come from associating with her kind. And about Callan, man who can't protect his own shouldn't be taking up with another woman so soon. Ruby tried to ignore it, focusing on her work and the quiet joy of her evening walks with Callan. But the talk grew louder, meaner. Someone left a note under her door at the boarding house, "Decent women don't take up with drunks." Another suggested she was using Callan for his newfound money from the land sale. It came to a head on a Thursday evening. The ladies' auxiliary was holding their monthly meeting at the church, and Ruby had been pointedly not invited despite attending services regularly. She was walking past, carrying linens from the saloon, when she heard her name through the open windows. Simply not appropriate. Mrs. Thornberry was saying, "We have standards to maintain in Wind Hollow. That woman worked in a saloon, and before that, who knows what she did to get herself run out of Galveston." "Now, Martha?" another voice interjected. Ruby recognized Mrs. Palmer, the baker's wife. "She's been nothing but respectable since she arrived." "Respectable women don't seduce grieving men." "Mrs. Thornberry shot back. Poor Callan Ridge, taken advantage of in his vulnerable state. Mark my words, she's after his money." Ruby stood frozen, the bundle of linens heavy in her arms. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet wouldn't move. "That's quite enough." A new voice, strong and clear. "Mrs. Watson. Ruby O'Hara has worked honestly since the day she arrived. She pays her rent on time, keeps to herself, and helps anyone who needs it, which is more than I can say for some in this room who spread gossip like it's gospel. Lydia Watson, you're only defending her because she rents from you. I'm defending her because it's right." Mrs. Watson interrupted. "And because I'm tired of watching good people get torn down by those who have nothing better to do than judge." Ruby fled then, tears burning her eyes. She made it to the boarding house and up to her room, dropping the linens in a heap. How foolish she'd been to think she could escape her past, could build something new. The gossips would always find something to condemn. She was sitting on her bed, trying to compose herself, when she heard boots on the stairs, heavier than Callan's usual step. A sharp knock rattled her door. "Miss O'Hara, it's Mayor Garrison. I need a word." Ruby opened the door to find the mayor, a portly man with graying whiskers, flanked by 2 members of the town council. Her heart sank. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, "how can I help you?" Mayor Garrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss O'Hara, we've had some concerns raised about your presence in our community. Questions about your background, your influence on certain citizens." "My influence?" Ruby kept her voice level, though anger was building beneath her careful calm. "Callan Ridge is a respected man," one of the councilmen said. "His recent attachment to you has raised eyebrows. For the good of the community." "You want me to leave?" Ruby said it flatly, not a question. The mayor shifted his weight. "We think it might be best to avoid any unpleasantness. We're prepared to offer you funds for travel, to help you establish yourself elsewhere." Ruby stared at them, these men in their Sunday suits, so certain of their right to dictate her life. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll be forced to look more closely into your past." The third man said, "Contact authorities in Galveston. Perhaps see what they have to say about Ruby May O'Hara." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ruby lifted her chin, rage and despair warring in her chest. "I see. How long do I have to decide?" "We'll expect your answer by Sunday," the mayor said. already backing away. For everyone's sake, Miss O'Hara, make the right choice. After they left, Ruby sank onto her bed, shaking. It was happening again, her past catching up, destroying any chance at happiness. She should have known better than to think she could have something good, something pure. She was still sitting there when Callan arrived an hour later, worry etched on his face. "Ruby, I heard those bastards were here." "They want me to leave," she said dully. "They'll make trouble if I don't. Contact Galveston. Dig up all the old accusations." Callan knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "Then we'll face it together." "No." She pulled her hands away. "You don't understand. If they contact the hospital board, if they bring up the inquiry, Callan, they painted me as negligent, reckless. Some even suggested I hastened that woman's death deliberately. It was all lies, but mud sticks. Your reputation would be ruined too." "Let them talk," he said fiercely. "I don't care." "I care." Ruby stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "You've lost enough. I won't be the cause of more pain in your life." "The only pain would be losing you." Callan rose, crossing to her. "Ruby, look at me." She turned reluctantly, tears streaming down her face. "We both came to Wind Hollow running from something," he said quietly. "But somewhere along the way, we stopped running and started building. Don't let them tear down what we've built." "They have the power." "No," he interrupted. "They have fear. Fear of anything different, anything that doesn't fit their narrow ideas of propriety. But we have something stronger." "What's that?" "Truth, love, and a whole lot of folks who know our character, regardless of our past." He pulled her into his arms. "Ruby, if you want to leave, I'll go with you. But if you want to stay and fight, I'll stand beside you. Either way, we face it together." Ruby clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "They'll make our lives miserable." "Maybe, but at least we'll be miserable together." "Despite everything," she laughed, a watery sound, but genuine. "That's your grand romantic statement, we'll be miserable together." "I never claimed to be a poet," Callan said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But I mean it. Whatever comes, we weather it side by side." A commotion in the street below drew their attention. Looking out, Ruby saw an extraordinary sight. A crowd was gathering outside the boarding house. Not an angry mob, but familiar faces, Mrs. Watson stood at the front, arms crossed. Beside her were Murphy, Violet, Pearl, and the other girls from the saloon. Sam the regular, Doc Henderson, even some of the ranch hands Callan worked with. "What's happening?" Ruby breathed. "Mrs." Watson's voice carried clearly through the evening air. "Mayor Garrison, we know you're listening. This is a delegation of concerned citizens, and we have something to say." The mayor appeared from the direction of his office, the councilman trailing behind. "Lydia, what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Mrs." Watson said crisply, "is that we're tired of bullies masquerading as moral authorities. Ruby O'Hara is a member of this community, and we won't stand by while you railroad her out of town." "This isn't your concern." "Like hell it isn't," Murphy growled. "That woman's shown more Christian charity than half the folks warming pews on Sunday. She's tended sick folks without asking for payment, helped families in need. That's the measure of a person, not some gossip from hundreds of miles away." Doc Henderson stepped forward. "I've seen her medical knowledge firsthand. She saved the baker boy when he had that breathing attack last month. Knew exactly what to do when I couldn't get there in time. You want to run out someone with those skills in a town with one doctor." One by one, people spoke up. Violet talked about how Ruby had taught her to read. Pearl mentioned the vegetables Ruby shared from her garden. Even crusty old Sam talked about the time Ruby had sat with him through a bad night when memories of the war came calling. "This is all very touching," one of the councilmen said. "But it doesn't change the questions about her past. Everyone deserves a second chance. a new voice said. Ruby gasped as Reverend Mills stepped out of the crowd. Isn't that the foundation of our faith, redemption, forgiveness? Whatever Miss O'Hara did or didn't do in Galveston, she's been nothing but a blessing to Wind Hollow. The crowd murmured agreement. The mayor looked increasingly uncomfortable as more people arrived, drawn by the commotion. Furthermore, Mrs. Watson continued, if you pursue this vendetta against Miss O'Hara, you'll find several of us prepared to share some interesting information about certain councilmen and their activities at establishments less respectable than the Broken Wheel. The implied threat was clear. One of the councilmen went pale. Mayor Garrison raised his hands. Now, there's no need for anyone to get upset. Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment. If the community vouches for Miss O'Hara, well, he cleared his throat. We'll consider the matter closed. The crowd didn't disperse immediately, making sure the mayor and council retreated completely. Then, as if by agreement, they began to drift away, most offering nods or touches to Ruby's window as they passed. Ruby turned from the window to find Callan watching her with a soft smile. See truth and love, and a town full of people who know good when they see it. I can't believe they did that, Ruby whispered. For me. You've been so busy trying to be invisible, Callan said gently. You didn't notice how many lives you've touched, how many people see you for who you really are, not your past, not your mistakes, but you. Ruby kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they parted, she knew her decision was made. I'm staying, she said firmly. We're staying. Whatever comes next, we face it here, in our home. Our home, Callan repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. As night fell over Wind Hollow, Ruby stood in the circle of Callan's arms, looking out at the town that had chosen to fight for her. She'd come here seeking anonymity, a place to hide from her shame. Instead, she'd found a community, a purpose, and a love she'd never expected. The gossips wouldn't stop overnight. There would still be whispers, cold shoulders from some, but surrounded by people who saw her worth, standing beside a man who loved her not despite her past, but because of who it had shaped her to be. Ruby knew she could weather any storm. Thank you, she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Callan, to the town, or to whatever force had guided her to Wind Hollow. No, Callan murmured against her hair. Thank you for reminding us all that everyone deserves a chance to start again. The storm hit Wind Hollow with a fury that old-timers would talk about for years to come. It started as a wall of black clouds on the horizon, rolling in fast from the northwest. By the time the first fat raindrops began to fall, folks were already battening down shutters and bringing livestock to shelter. Ruby had just finished her work at the saloon when the sky opened up. Within minutes, the rain was coming down in sheets so thick she could barely see across the street. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning split the darkening sky in jagged white tears. You can't go out in this, Murphy said firmly as she prepared to dash to the boarding house. Wait it out here. But through the window, Ruby could see people struggling against the wind, and her heart sank as she recognized the Whitaker family newcomers to town with 3 small children, trying to reach shelter. Their wagon was mired in the sudden mud of Main Street, and the father was desperately trying to free the wheels while his wife clutched the terrified children. Without thinking, Ruby grabbed a heavy cloak and plunged into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, and within seconds she was soaked through. She reached the family just as lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder immediate and deafening. The church! She shouted over the roar of the storm. It's closest. Together, they got the children to safety. Ruby carrying the youngest, a girl of perhaps 3, who buried her face in Ruby's shoulder. They'd just reached the church steps when they heard the screaming. The creek! Someone yelled. It's over its banks. The lower houses are flooding. Ruby's blood ran cold. The lower section of town, where the poorest families lived, sat right along Willow Creek. In weather like this,
The usually placid stream would become a raging torrent. Inside the church, Reverend Mills was already organizing rescue efforts. "We need every able body," he called out. "Ropes, lanterns, anything that might help." "I'll get medical supplies," Ruby said, handing the child to her mother. She was turning to leave when strong hands caught her shoulders. "Ruby, no." Callan stood there, soaked from his own dash through the storm. "It's too dangerous." "People will be hurt," she said firmly. "I can help." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Then we go together, always together. Remember?" They plunged back into the storm, making their way to Doc Henderson's office. The elderly doctor was already pulling supplies together, his face grim. "Bad as I've ever seen," he said, handing Ruby a medical bag. "We'll need all the help we can get." The scene at the creek was chaos. Water had risen with terrifying speed, turning the lower street into a rushing river. Families were trapped on roofs, clinging to whatever they could find. The rescue efforts were hampered by the darkness and the violence of the storm. Ruby lost track of time, moving from one crisis to the next. She treated cuts from debris, wrapped a child's broken arm, helped pull an elderly man from where he'd been trapped by rising water. Through it all, Callan stayed close, adding his strength to the rescue efforts. It was past midnight when someone shouted, "The Miller place! The whole family's still inside!" Ruby knew the Millers, a young couple with a baby, living in a small house right on the creek bank. Without hesitation, she joined the group of men heading that way, ignoring Callan's protests. The house was nearly submerged, water rushing around it with tremendous force. Inside, they could see lamplight and shadows moving frantically. "The current's too strong," one of the men said. "We can't get a rope across." "The tree," Ruby said suddenly, pointing to a large cottonwood whose branches extended over the water. "If someone could climb out, drop a rope from above?" "I'll go," Callan said immediately, but Ruby was already moving. "I'm lighter," she said, pulling off the sodden cloak that would only weigh her down. "I can get further out on the branches." Before anyone could stop her, she was climbing. The bark was slick with rain, and the wind threatened to tear her from her perch with every gust. But she'd climbed trees as a child, and her body remembered the rhythm. Up and out she went, until she was directly over the house. "Catch!" she yelled, dropping one end of the rope through a broken window. She saw hands grab it, then wrapped her end around the branch and herself, becoming a human anchor. One by one, the family emerged. First the mother with the baby strapped to her chest, then the father. Men on the shore pulled them to safety as Ruby held the rope, her arms screaming with strain. She was starting to climb back when lightning struck the tree. The world went white, then black. Ruby felt herself falling, heard Callan's voice screaming her name, then water, cold and violent, pulling her under. She came to on the church floor, coughing up creek water while what felt like half the town crowded around. Callan's face swam into focus above her, wet with rain or tears or both. "Don't you ever," he said hoarsely, "ever do something like that again." "The Millers," she managed to croak. "Safe, all of them, thanks to you." Doc Henderson appeared, checking her pupils. "That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen. Also the most doctorly. Welcome back to medicine, Miss O'Hara." Ruby tried to sit up, winced at the pain in her ribs. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," the doctor said firmly. "I'm too old to handle disasters like this alone. Tonight proved Wind Hollow needs more than one person with medical training. I'll be writing to the state board myself, recommending they reinstate your certification. But Galveston can go hang." "Mrs." Watson interrupted from the crowd. "After what you did tonight, anyone who questions your dedication to saving lives will have to go through all of us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled townspeople. Ruby saw faces she knew and many she didn't, all looking at her with respect and gratitude. "The vote's unanimous," Mayor Garrison said.
And Ruby was shocked to see the man who'd tried to run her out of town just days ago now looking at her with something approaching awe. "Wind Hollow needs a nurse. If Doc Henderson vouches for you, that's good enough for us." Ruby felt tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. She'd lost everything trying to save one life in Galveston. Tonight, she'd risked everything to save lives here, and instead of condemnation, she'd found acceptance.
I don't know what to say."
"Say yes," Callan murmured, helping her sit up carefully.
"Say you'll stay. Say you'll build a life here, with me, with all of us."
Ruby looked around the church, at Violet and the girls who'd become friends, at Murphy who'd given her a chance, at Mrs. Watson who'd defended her, at Doc Henderson who was offering her redemption, at all the faces of people who'd chosen to see her worth.
"Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it."
The celebration was brief. There was still too much work to do. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake, but also leaving something else, a community united by crisis, strengthened by shared purpose. As dawn broke over Wind Hollow, Ruby stood with Callan surveying the damage. The lower street was a mess of mud and debris. Several houses were damaged beyond repair, but no lives had been lost, and that felt like a miracle. "We'll rebuild," someone said, and others took up the sentiment, "We'll rebuild better."
"Together,"
Ruby added softly, and Callan squeezed her hand. Over the next days, Wind Hollow showed its true character. Those who'd lost homes were taken in by neighbors. Everyone contributed what they could to the rebuilding effort, and at the center of it all, Ruby worked alongside Doc Henderson, treating injuries, preventing disease from contaminated water, proving with every action that she was exactly what the town needed. A week after the storm, a letter arrived from the Texas Medical Board. Doc Henderson's recommendation, co-signed by Mayor Garrison and half the town council, had been received. They would review her case, consider reinstatement.
"It's not a guarantee,"
Ruby told Callan as they sat in her garden, now somewhat bedraggled from the storm, but already showing signs of recovery.
"It's a chance," he said. "That's all anyone can ask for."
Ruby leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence.
"You saved me, you know, from the water."
"You saved yourself," he corrected, "by being the kind of person others wanted to save, by showing us all what real courage looks like."
"I was terrified," she admitted. "That's what makes it courage."
He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Ruby May O'Hara, you came to Wind Hollow to hide. Instead, you've become the heart of this town. How does that feel?" Ruby considered the question, thinking of all that had happened since she'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago.
"It feels,"
she said finally, "like coming home." Above them, Sarah's seeds had sprouted in the garden beds, green shoots pushing through the storm-battered earth. New life from old grief, hope from heartache. It seemed fitting, somehow. "What are you thinking?" Callan asked.
"That storms come to every life,"
Ruby said. "But if you're lucky, if you're very, very lucky, you find people to weather them with."
"And if you're even luckier,"
Callan added, "you find someone to love in the sunshine that follows." Ruby turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. "I love you, Callan Ridge, storm or shine."
"And I love you, Ruby May O'Hara, past, present, and future."
As the sun climbed higher over Wind Hollow, painting the rain-washed world in shades of gold and green, Ruby knew that her running days were over. She'd found something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a future on. The storm had tested them all and found them strong, not individually, but together, and together, they would face whatever came next. The week after the storm brought an unexpected calm to Wind Hollow. The town had pulled together in the crisis, and something fundamental had shifted in how people saw each other and how they saw Ruby. She'd become not just accepted, but essential, her medical skills proving invaluable as the community rebuilt. It was on such a quiet evening, with spring fully settled over the Texas plains, that Callan appeared at Ruby's door,
He stood there in his best clothes, hat in hand, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Callan?" She set aside the medical text Doc Henderson had lent her. "What is it? Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that." He shifted his weight, then seemed to gather his courage. "Ruby, I need to talk to you. Not here, somewhere private." Concern flickered through her, but she took the hand he offered. They walked in silence through the town, past the saloon where they'd first met, past the church where the town had sheltered during the storm, until they reached the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Wind Hollow. Callan led her to a simple headstone new, the carving fresh. Sarah Morrison, it read, with dates that marked a life cut far too short, beloved and remembered. "I had it made with part of the money from the land sale," Callan said quietly. Seemed right that she should have a proper marker, even if... He trailed off. Ruby squeezed his hand, understanding, even if her body lay elsewhere. This was where Callan had finally laid her memory to rest. "She would have liked you," he continued, "would have admired your courage, your kindness, the way you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it." He turned to face her fully. "Ruby, I loved Sarah with everything I had. When I lost her, I thought that part of me died too. Thought I'd never feel anything but grief and guilt again." "Callan, let me finish," he said gently. "You asked me once why I came to your door that night. The truth is, I'd been drowning for 3 years, and somehow I knew you were the only one who could pull me to shore. Not because you could make me forget Sarah, but because you could show me it was possible to honor the past while still reaching for a future." He dropped to one knee, and Ruby's breath caught as he pulled out a small, worn box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a tiny diamond. "It's not much, but it's all I have that matters. Ruby May O'Hara. You came to Wind Hollow to hide from the world, and I came here to drink myself into forgetting. Instead, we found each other. We found home. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Not in the shadow of our pasts, but in the light of what we can make together." Ruby felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who'd seen her at her lowest and chose to love her anyway, who understood that some wounds never fully healed but believed they could still choose happiness despite the scars. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Callan Ridge. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and kissed her as the sun set over Wind Hollow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When they parted, both were crying and laughing at once. "We should tell people," Ruby said, admiring how the simple ring caught the dying light. "In a minute," Callan said, pulling her close. "Just let me hold you for a minute. Let me believe this is real." They stood there in the peaceful cemetery, surrounded by the stories of lives lived and lost. Two people who'd found their way through grief to something beautiful and unexpected. When they finally made their way back to town, word spread quickly. Violet actually squealed when she saw the ring, and Pearl immediately began planning what she called the wedding Wind Hollow deserves. Mrs. Watson huffed about propriety but was caught wiping her eyes when she thought no one was looking. That night, Callan knocked on Ruby's door once more. When she opened it, he stood there with that same nervous energy from earlier. "What is it now?" she asked, amused. "I realized something," he said. "All those nights I spent in that saloon, drinking whiskey and watching the door. I told you I wasn't there for the whiskey, but I didn't know what I was there for until tonight." "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, framing her face with his hands. "I was waiting for you, even before I knew you existed. I was waiting for you to walk through that door and save me from myself." "Callan, you asked me once if I thought the ones we failed forgive us. I think maybe they send us angels instead, to show us we're still capable of love, still worthy of happiness." He kissed her forehead softly. "You're my angel, Ruby, my second chance at everything." If I'm an angel, I'm a rather tarnished one, Ruby said, though her heart was full to bursting. Perfect angels are for perfect people. Callan replied, I'll take the one who knows what it's like to fall and chooses to get back up anyway. A week later, standing in her small room with moonlight streaming through the window, Ruby found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd fled Galveston in disgrace. Certain her life was over. She'd taken the lowest job she could find in a town that didn't even appear on most maps, just trying to disappear. Instead, she'd found everything she'd never dared hope for. Love with a man who understood that broken didn't mean worthless. A community that judged her by her actions, not her past. A chance to use her skills again, to be the healer she'd always felt called to be. Another knock at her door, gentle this time, almost hesitant. Come in, she called, knowing who it was. Callan entered, and she could see he'd been wrestling with something. I've been thinking, he said without preamble, about what you said, about needing a place to sleep, about finding peace. Ruby waited, sensing this was important. I don't need whiskey anymore, he continued. Haven't touched a drop since the storm, but I still need... He met her eyes. I still need you. Need to know you're there, that you're real, that this isn't just another dream I'll wake up from alone. Ruby crossed to him, taking his hands. What are you asking, Callan? Stay with me tonight, he said simply. Not for anything improper, just be there. Let me fall asleep knowing you're beside me. Let me wake up and see your face first thing. I know we should wait until the wedding, but... Yes, Ruby interrupted softly. He blinked. Yes. You think you came to my door for whiskey, she said, echoing his words from that night. No, you came for human connection, for the comfort of not being alone with your ghosts. I understand that need, Callan. I feel it too. She led him to her narrow bed, and they lay down fully clothed on top of the covers. Callan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, and she felt him relax for the first time since she'd known him. Tell me something, he murmured against her hair. When did you know? Know what? That you loved me. Ruby considered. The night you told me about Sarah? When you trusted me with your deepest pain. I realized then that I wanted to be the one who helped carry it, who reminded you that grief and joy could exist in the same heart. And you? She asked. When did you know? The day that doctor from Galveston tried to shame you. Callan said without hesitation, when you stood there with your chin up, refusing to be broken by his cruelty, I thought, that's the strongest woman I've ever seen. And then I thought, I want to be strong enough to deserve her. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of wind hollow through the open window. Somewhere, a dog barked. A late wagon rattled past, life continuing its eternal rhythm. Ruby, Callan's voice was growing drowsy. Promise me something. Promise that no matter what comes, good times or bad, sickness or health, all of it, promise you'll always let me in. Don't shut me out. Don't try to protect me by pushing me away. We face everything together. I promise, Ruby said, turning in his arms to look at his face. Together, always. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, full of promise rather than passion. I love you, Ruby May O'Hara. Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for saving me. We saved each other, Ruby corrected, settling back against him. That's what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our pasts, from the loneliness that threatens to swallow us whole. As sleep began to claim them both, Ruby marveled at the peace she felt. Not the absence of trouble, life would always have its storms, but the deep, abiding peace of knowing she wasn't alone anymore, that she'd found her place, her purpose, her person. If you need a place to sleep, she whispered into the darkness. Then here there are soft blankets and a heart wide enough for both our ghosts. That's all I ever needed, Callan murmured back. Just you, just this, just home. And in that small room above a frontier town, two wounded souls found their healing in each other's arms. Not a cure. Some hurts run too deep for that, but something better, the knowledge that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. That second chances were possible. And that sometimes the very thing you're running from becomes the path to everything you're running toward. The moon traced its path across the Texas sky, and Wind Hollow slept peacefully, guarding the dreams of all who'd found refuge in its dusty streets and warm hearts. And in the morning, the sun would rise on new possibilities, new hopes, and the promise that the best stories are the ones where love wins, not by erasing the past, but by writing a better future. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Ruby and Callan's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts about their story. If you enjoyed this tale of love, loss, and redemption in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this story of two broken souls finding home in each other. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.